So we get started. This is Ocean Shores Plan Commission meeting, Tuesday, October 12th, 2021 at 2 p.m. at the Ocean Shores Library. Roll call. Greg Cox. Here. Rich Hartman.
Here.
Nadia Robert. Eleanor Dorman. You can join us?
Eleanor, are you there?
She's not on.
Okay.
Okay. Richard Wills.
Here.
Pat Runstead.
Here.
Well, Eleanor had a doctor's appointment this morning, and she's not sure if she's gonna be able to show up, so should I make a motion to excuse her now?
So moved.
Okay, who's taking notes?
Okay. I'm taking notes?
Yeah.
Oh crap, okay. That's what I read in the minutes. Now I'll do that.
Okay, who do we have on Zoom? I can barely see that picture, so I think that's Nick Bird. Right?
Bird and Marshall.
Marshall. Is Matt there?
Nick
I'm
is
here.
Marshall is here, and Richard is on video as well.
Okay, thank you all for running.
Right, and then Rich.
You gonna open, Mr. Chair?
Yeah, I'm still working on it.
Oh, okay.
Okay, do I have a motion to approve the meeting agenda?
I move we approve the meeting agenda.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
So moved. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes of September 28th, 2021?
So moved.
A second?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
So moved. Public comment?
I don't know about on Zoom.
Go ahead.
I'm a little bit concerned about a combination of things that you talked about last time.
Wait, I can't hear Marlene.
Eleanor's here, by the way.
Go ahead, Marlene.
I think it was great.
And the things that I'm concerned about is lumping R2 through R5 all into medium density in combination with the areas that you want to downgrade from R2, 3, 4 down to R1. Because the way it stands right now, if that downgrade doesn't happen, a place where you used to have a duplex lot across the street from you could now be a sixplex with all the people and the cars that go along with it. I have a little trouble turning the units per acre into potential units per lot. As far as that's concerned, and I think that's very confusing. But I'm not sure you're gonna get that downgrade. I mean, wouldn't that be considered property takings? I mean, if somebody bought a duplex lot with plans to retire below and put a rental unit above for income, and if you downzone and bring it to an R1, aren't you taking away property rights? So I'm not sure that you're gonna get that reduction down to single family, which then almost makes the situation worse. Because everything that was R2, R3, R4 now can be R6s, or there are can be sixplexes. So I'm concerned about that combination, that you might actually end up making the situation for those 4 strips of land worse than they are now. And also on R2, in our current code, that's considered low density, not medium density. So I don't know how you would work that. Again, with the units per acre, I have a really hard time figuring out where R2 fits, whether it fits in low or medium. So I don't know about that. Units per, I mean, if somebody builds a sixplex, then nobody else can build anything but a single family around them. I mean, I find it really confusing with the units per acre. That's it.
You are in the right place because we're gonna talk about it.
Okay, let's see if there's any more public comment.
Don Williams, do you have a public comment?
Can you hear me okay? I don't, but I'd like to hear you. Are we okay?
Yep.
Thank you.
Catherine Sprague, do you have a public comment?
I do not.
That's it, okay. I'll turn the meeting over to Greg.
Okey dokey, I put you got your agenda, which has a couple of things that we're going to access, the package does. And then I put a separate stack of paper, it's a combination of probably 7 different documents that we've accessed over time, but we'll reference today, and then there's a couple of new ones. And in the future, I'll do a better job of getting getting electronic versions to Sarah, so that when she prints out the agenda and all the attachments, they'll all be there. And the planning department has agreed that in the future, like they do with the city council, they will print out the entire package for us and put it in the mail holder across the street, so that we can all go get it rather than print so much paper. Questions? Tony?
I would just offer a comment, whoever's in the planning department printing those, I usually bring my computer, and so we'll save that much paper, and I don't need a copy.
Good enough.
Typically, I wouldn't need a copy either, but
I
I won't
do.
be here for one more meeting.
I mean, I'm wallowing in paper at home, and there's just no way for me to keep track of all this without paper, so I'm gonna prevail. I'm at least gonna get a copy. So, Tanya, are you saying you don't want one?
I don't.
And Richard, you don't want one?
Correct.
So we need 4 in the future. Okay, so I'm gonna be looking at this package that I gave you. I've moved away from the agenda. The top page of the package includes flip chart notes. And if you haven't figured it out, flip chart notes is a way of us keeping track of all the potential future changes to the draft plan. And again, it's potential. We haven't decided on all this, but we worked our way through it. And number 3 there says pyramid zoning, and we'll talk about that today with Matt Genesis help from the Department of Commerce. Public comments. We had public comment before about what are the implications of the new homeless ordinance. Today we'll add this new public comment about the implications of the condensed zoning that we're talking about. And then there's also a running commentary on the Ocean Shores Planning Commission comments. And essentially, if you read, especially the Ocean Shore comments, well, any of it, we basically, in the process of building this, we build our next agenda. So anything that's left hanging out, there'll be a date about when we're supposed to come back and talk about it. So everything, number 3 and 2 through 4, on the bottom, we'll talk about today. So I'm going to bring us back to where we were a long time ago. On October 5th, I sent out that's the second document in your package. I sent you all of this that is a recap of a conversation that I had with Matt, and 1 through 7 are the items that, I'm sorry. Looking at the wrong thing. Yeah, I am looking at the wrong thing. The second sheet is just what we're going to talk about, is a detailed agenda about what we're going to talk about today. The third sheet is, and let's see, do I need to talk about anything else here? No. 1 through 7 on the second sheet is what I'm going to be using to get through today, and it's definitely a full agenda. So the third sheet is a summary or recap of the discussion that I had with Matt. And 1 through 6 are the items that we had previously talked about. Matt, do you know when you came to brief us, way back in 2018 or 2017? Are you there, Matt? Are you there? Is he muted?
Yes, I'm muted. I'm fumbling around to try and find my controller. I can't remember
It doesn't matter.
it was right when the Planning Commission was starting in on the critical areas portion.
Right.
if
So
I'm,
Elaine probably remembers. Weren't you at that meeting with Matt Case?
I'm sorry.
Just asking if you were at that meeting when Matt came to brief us. So at any rate, Matt, I'm gonna turn it over to you at this point and let you, you want me to read this stuff out or? Well, let me read it and maybe that'll start a series of conversations or questions that the planning commission has for you.
okay.
Number one was local governments do have the authority to change land use zones and their corresponding ordinances. Number two, moving from pyramid zoning to exclusionary zoning is authorized and may be advantageous. Number three, downsizing from less restrictive zone designations to is authorized. For example, changing multifamily to single-family designations. Number four, existing structures are grandfathered in until replacement is necessary through non-conforming use ordinances. Number five, zoning changes on unbuilt lots are authorized and binding because the owner can still expect reasonable economic profit. Number six, combining existing zones may be warranted when ordinances are essentially the same and an accompanying matrix addresses permitted development by lot size and parking specifications. So, Matt, do you have anything to add?
No, what I will do, I will cite the federal Supreme Court decision that established zoning. And it was the Village of Euclid versus Ambler Realty, and this was in 1926. The Ambler Realty had approximately 28 acre lot. They were intending to develop for industrial use, and the city of Euclid did not desire to have industrial use there, so they created a zoning ordinance which regulated by lot size and by height, which precluded that area from being developed as industrial. Ambler Realty took them to court and it worked its way up, and it was the Supreme Court found that it was within the power of cities and towns to establish different zone districts with specific applicable regulations. So that's getting to the way back of being able to do zoning. In Washington, in the state constitution, it's any city or town can establish police power zoning as long as it is not in conflict with the general law, which is state law, state or federal law. So there's the two bases for zoning. That's the first two. Greg, if you could read.
Ask questions of you?
Yep, not a problem.
Rich?
So you're reciting a lawsuit from about 100 years ago, am I right?
Yes.
Okay. What was the original designation of the land? What was the original zoning of the land?
There was no zoning.
Okay.
The village of Euclid created the zoning to preclude undesired use because there was no existing regulation. So zoning had been used before in various cities, but this was the challenge. This created the legal challenge that took zoning to the U.S. Supreme Court, and then it became a matter of established precedent.
I would have a personal problem with a 100-year-old lawsuit that is based on a piece of land that had no zoning to begin with, comparing to us rezoning somebody's land today that's already zoned. They bought their land, it's zoned a certain way, and we're gonna change it and say, tough luck. So I'll let you carry on. Thank you.
I have a question. And my question, Matt, Mr. Genesis, I have heard and then read an article in a newspaper that the state may be considering allowing multifamily zoning in all existing single-family zones. And I'm wondering if you have any information, and if that comes to pass, how does that affect us in Ocean Shores? Do we need to be concerned about that during this period of our zoning discussions?
I'll take the second one first. The state did pass House Bill 1220 this last session. No, pardon me, 2 sessions ago, which affected, which was for, which created some effects for housing, and it would allow duplexes and triplexes on corner lots. That being said, they would still be bound by the other zoning regulations, ground coverage for lot size and that those sort of things, but they would be allowed within single family areas. However, that being said, that may be only for fully planning counties, which Grays Harbor is partially planning. It's only required to plan for critical areas. I will have to research that, and I will get back to you through Marshall and Greg on that. Regarding rezoning, that the Euclid v. Ambler is the federal court decision, the standing legal precedent for being able to use zoning. In regards to down zoning, state law only, this is getting into the vesting issue. Particular property rights only get locked in once you file a permit for construction or doing something on the property, and then you have a 5-year window, 5 + 1 + 1, so it can be up to a 7-year window to develop your property at the regulations at the time you filed the initial permit. And that's state law, and that's passed legal tests as well. So there's no, when you buy property, there is no guaranteed right to develop that property as it was zoned when you bought it in perpetuity. It's a piece of land that you can do something on, but the law may change, or through zoning changes that may change around it until you vest, and then it is locked in on what you can do with the property.
So I have one more question, if I may. And in this, specifically here in Ocean Shores, the B2 zone is kind of intended for outdoor types of functions like lumber yards and junk yards and those kinds of things. And the B1 zone is more for professional services. As we examine the Gateway Corridor, my understanding so far, and that's part of what today's discussion is we're probably looking at making the Gateway Corridor somewhat more B1. So my specific question is, how does that affect the lumber yard? And ideally, in a perfect world, as the lumber yard changed hands or whatever happened, that it would move off of the main thoroughfare and onto the side roads, Seahorse or Menard. But there's no place there to put the lumber yard. And so how would our gateway corridor affect businesses like the lumberyard or the existing car wash or those kinds of things? And Greg, if I'm getting way off track, then I will shut up and we'll move on.
I don't think you're off track. I
I'm
think,
very interested in this. I hate taking away property rights.
well, I don't think that's what Richard's suggesting.
No, no.
I just want to know how it's going
He
to,
just wants to know, are we gonna be able to accommodate those
Right.
kinds of businesses in the future under the Gateway Corridor? And my answer to that is yes, because I don't think we're precluding, we didn't make any those activities, I think, are specifically listed in the comp plan.
they are, and when we get into that phase of the discussion, what I'm about to say may be better when we get into that phase of the discussion. But my understanding, if we are going to move towards eliminating pyramid zoning in commercial zones, I think that the B3 is very blurred and will probably remain just like it is. But B1 and B2, as I look at those purpose and conditional use statements, permitted uses, then it looks to me that there should be some separation in those purpose statements. And then I guess what I'm digging at is if the Point Brown thoroughfare became B1 and the lumberyard changed hands, I assume we could write the regulation that says it can continue to be a lumberyard for as long as it wants to be a lumberyard.
So Matt, you understand Richard's question? When he's talking about selling the business, not replacing the business.
You,
Understanding is that the existing zone, when you sell the business, still, even if it was a non-conforming use, you could still sell the business to another owner.
yes, it's so the lumberyard would be a if I'm understanding correctly, this is, and it's been a while since I've been out there for obvious reasons. But I think I know where the lumberyard's at. It would be if the zoning was changed, so it's more, so the corridor there is retail, tourism, retail, that sort of function, but the lumberyard is still there. It would be a non-conforming use in the zone, and there'd be no need, there's no requirement that it would move, and as long as it is a going concern, it would be allowed to stay there. However, if it was for whatever reason destroyed, then that property would be become under the commercial zoning, and that's how non-conforming uses are treated under state law.
So to clarify that, and again, this is just a wild example, but if the lumberyard burned down, so it was destroyed, and if the zoning had been changed that it did not preclude, that it did not allow lumberyards, then the lumberyard could not rebuild. It would have to find someplace else to exist. Do I grasp the complexities correctly?
Yes.
Correct, although I still don't think that we've precluded the lumberyard in the comp plan. So I'm not real sure how much time we want to spend on this. I mean, there's nothing in the comp plan that says that auto services, lumberyard are not allowed.
You're correct. And I'm only conjecturing if we narrow the scope of the purpose and conditional uses, as I think has to be done if we're going to separate B1 and B2, they need to have distinctly different purposes. And so how do we accommodate the overlap in cases like this that's going to require an overlap? And that's my concern is how do we accommodate what appears to be required overlaps?
When you say overlap, you mean the Gateway Corridor?
Right, yes.
Honestly, I don't see how that changes anything, unless we wrote something that did. So we haven't written the ordinance for Gateway. So, but I think that's a relevant question when we get around to
Okay.
writing that. And to be cogent or cognizant of that possibility. Well, we don't, that's not our intent with the Gateway Corridor. The Gateway Corridor, really the intent of the Gateway Corridor is downtown revitalization and maybe beautification. It's not really designed, I don't read anything in the comp plan that says we're trying to exclude any particular kind of business.
And again, as I read and understand the comp plan, you're correct. I'm just thinking of the contingency. If we narrow the scope of B1 and B2, how does that impact our plan? And this is, I'm quite happy to defer this conversation to a more appropriate time.
Okay, I'm gonna capture that. I'm just gonna put down here B1, B2. Because I don't think we've talked, so far we've talked about combining B1 and B2.
No, not combining them, as they are now, because we have pyramid zoning. Anything anything that's in a B2 zone can also have a B1 function. And our discussion, what it says in the comp plan is that we want to limit or eliminate pyramid zoning. And maybe I don't fully grasp pyramid zoning, but if we're,
That's a good segue because that's the next subject.
okay.
So are we good? I mean, we'll keep our eye on this. I think it's a good point to bring up. Is everybody okay for Matt to move to
Yes.
pyramid zoning? So as a prep, Matt, did you have anything to add before we move to pyramid zoning?
No, I will, I've got some points within addressing pyramid versus exclusionary zoning that may provide some clarity in how to treat things like the lumberyard, like the theoretical discussion around the lumberyard. So I will hopefully be able to include that, and if I don't get there, throw the proverbial phone brick at me to remind me before I get done talking.
Okay, well, as a preface to pyramid zoning, each of you have as your next document, a red and black version that's got a title at the top that says pyramid zoning. Rich pulled this out of the existing comp plan, and it basically has a definition. It's a zoning ordinance that permits a more restrictive zone classification in a less restricted zone. For example, pyramid zoning may allow light industrial and heavy industrial areas. Pyramid zoning in commercial areas it starts out allowing residential uses of commercial zone land, limits commercial development. Commercial enterprise favors ground floor use. However, community safety and land use efficiency can be improved. Residential use is permitted above the commercial establishment. Allowing residential use on floors above the ground floor would potentially increase the return on investment, decrease total combined residential commercial overhead, and basically improve safety. I'm just paraphrasing, but essentially the recommendation in the comp plan was pretty clear that the intent of the planning commission was to eliminate pyramid zoning citywide. It sounds, when in our rereading of the draft, it's very well emphasized for the commercial zones, and it's sort of fuzzy about residential zones. So right now, Matt, there's a number of questions about really the pros and cons of having pyramid zoning that allows you to construct anything less restrictive on the property in question versus, as you say, exclusionary, which means that if it says triplex, it means triplex, for example, in residential. So how can you enlighten us about, is there anything good about pyramid zoning? Matt?
Yeah, it's not that I can think of in comparison to exclusionary zoning. I will preface my comments with a really brief and high level definition of property rights and takings. So the property rights that are associated with a piece of property are the right of the owner to possess, to own, to sell, to exclude, to prevent trespassing, and to make an economic return on the property. This doesn't mean an economic profit. It's come to through different court cases. It's that the laws associated with the property that govern the property cannot reduce the property's value to zero or close to zero. So that being said, and hopefully that will, in going through this, hopefully that keeping that in mind in terms of what changes may occur in zones that because the zone changes, that doesn't mean that there is a taking regarding a particular parcel. If there is not necessarily a taking if a particular parcel changes zones, or if the zoning change, or if the specifics of the zoning change around the parcel. So the benefits of exclusionary zoning are it's much better at creating predictability. Banks like predictability, insurance companies like predictability. So if you have a downtown, with pyramid zoning, what you can have right now is in your downtown and on the main street, someone can go in and drop in a single family detached home. That creates an issue for surrounding businesses, because if they're looking for financing, the bank may be going, well, this is becoming a residential neighborhood, and basically you're looking at a situation where you can have the reverse of what you want. And if you're looking to strengthen your commercial core, if you have residential coming into there, that's eliminating number of properties, number of the amount of street frontage you have for commercial retail uses. So it creates that sort of predictability. It the one I used with Greg in our previous conversation was you could have single family, just somebody with single family decide to drop in the hotel strip there, and that creates issues, and that's creates a problem where future hotel development is looking, if they're looking at it and going, well, if single families coming in here, that's going to interfere with our business model. So but with exclusionary zoning like that, where you have a predictable model of predictability on what's used, as opposed to well, anything less than this can be used. It creates a where banks can go, you know, if you're looking for finance, you can go in and go, okay, this is what's in the area, you know, could be used in this area. So there's predictability on whether the business is going to survive because it's around other businesses like it, it's commercial businesses, it's, you know, an established commercial district, and it's not having to worry about it changing from that because of the pyramid zoning where, you know, anything below that can come in. That's I'll stop there. So that's well, and okay, I'll add one thing with the lumberyard hypothetical is you could have in that zone a conditional use for a lumberyard or something like that, and you could put conditions around lot size, street frontage, aesthetics on, you know, making that it's, you know, for attractiveness, so it's not an eyesore. And I can't remember. I remember there being a lumberyard, but I can't remember the aesthetics of it. So there's different ways you can allow a use like that, but still, put conditions on it to ensure that it stays within the character of what you want within that zoning district. So if you're looking at having the downtown revitalization, it's like, okay, what do we want this area to look like, and have a design overlay on, you know, and it doesn't have to be, you know, like it's going to look like Leavenworth's level of design restrictions, but to create something that has the look and feel that the city wants. And that can be applied to lumberyards as well. Much harder with vehicle wrecking yards, but that, you know, it can be done. So that is that's what I will put forward for commercial and tourism, and I'll stop there to answer any questions on that.
Can you speak to pyramid zoning in residential community or zones?
So again, this is a predictability thing. If you're looking at pyramid zoning and residential, you have, as you're going into higher and more intense zoning, if you're still allowing single family within that zone, you're creating a situation where the property owners, there's not the predictability for property owners to address, you know, if it's, you know, medium density, let's say, you know, that's 6 units an acre or so. If you're allowing triplexes or sixplexes within that, but at the same time, single family detached can come in, you're reducing your ability to provide affordable housing stock or just housing stock in general within that zone because of that. And so you have that, and there may be ability for financing for multifamily because of that infiltration of single family within it, and again, predictability and worry about if this comes in, is there going to be noise complaints and that sort of thing. The reverse is true as well, where if it's a single addressing, was it Sarah's concern at the beginning? If you're allowing like duplexes and triplexes within traditionally, or currently single family zones, they can come in, but they can still be governed by other, by design, where there's you can regulate them by having parking requirement. They have to have X amount, X amount of off-street lot of parking spots per unit. They have to match, they have to be within the height restrictions for the district. They have to meet the impermeable surface area, that they have to have so much lawn or green space around the building. So there's different ways to regulate that, going from a traditionally low density zone to include potentially higher uses in it. There's still the ability to do that, and so that's where I would go with that. Again, this is high level, and I will hopefully be able to do my best, and hopefully it will be clear enough to answer your questions on other, on specifics, or what I've forgotten in the last couple of days.
So, like I said, we're pretty clear on what we want to do in existing commercial districts. We want to do away with pyramid zoning, but we're also encouraging what we're calling mixed residential / commercial use. In other words, we support the idea of having ancillary residential associated with the business, but are recommending that it be on the upper floor.
Yeah,
So,
and
go ahead.
And that's mixed use. That would be mixed use zoning, or I'll call it that. And if it's gateway commercial is what you decide, and it's mixed use zoning. It's ends up being what's in a name, but mixed use zoning is where you have second and third floor residential space and commercial space on the first floor. That's and again, that's something that banks and insurance companies know. It's a known quantity, that it's like, okay, they're creating, Ocean Shores has this district, and we're going to see requests for this. There's not a zoning issue, there's not a issue of running into well, is it going to happen or not? It's that the city, it's within existing zoning, that if they're coming in, that they're vested, that they can construct this, they can construct the building and move forward with it. So that's not an issue. It's you can't go back and mandate that existing ones do, but you can have a moving forward transformation along those lines.
Can I inject a comment here? So I just went to the Ocean Shores Municipal Code and verified the B3 zone allows that type of structure where the commercial facility is on the bottom floor and a residential facility on the upper floor. B3 specifically allows that, and it's called an accessory use function. rather than a mixed use, then that's just a name, the name's not important. That allowance is not in either B1 or B2 that I could see as I quickly peruse those. And my confusion about pyramid zoning revolves around residential use. So it makes perfect sense to me, and I'm asking other people, does this make sense to you that if we write that code that prohibits single family dwellings in commercial, but allows accessory use, second floor dwellings, does that make sense?
I sort of lost you there because you went from B1, B2, and you made a good point about what you were reading. It sounds like if, given that the comp plan is encouraging mixed use, which is
Right.
what we just talked
Right.
about, you read the code and said, well, in the existing code, that's not there. So that
Exactly.
sounds like a big one that we need when it comes to writing code, which is
Exactly.
what this is all about. And that's one that apparently needs to be modified.
So I'm
Then
going-
you switch to B3. And my understanding, I don't have it right in front of me, but B3, isn't that resort?
that's tourist resort.
Yeah,
And so like condominiums and big apartment buildings, I can easily see how that fits into tourist resort. But tourist resort should probably not allow single family dwellings unless they're already existing there. So what I see is as we address B1 and B2, that we would benefit by including B1 and B2 allows accessory structures or mixed use structures on the second floor, which is currently not in the zone, in the code.
that's a good point.
We knew that when we did the comp plan, that was our intent to allow that.
Okay, but, and I just want to capture that and make sure that we don't let that slip through the crack as we address B1 and B2.
Yeah, well, good point. So, good catch.
It's in.
So, Richard, I missed your point though about, I mean, I sort of get B3, but you transitioned to residential, and that's specifically what I wanted us to address. So as a preface to that, Matt, as you heard if you heard the beginning of the meeting from a member of the public about concerns about the collapsing of residential zones. Right now, based on what the Planning Commission has done so far, we're working toward collapsing 11 residential zones in Ocean Shores down to 5. And we basically have a single family designation, Arlene, R1 is single family. R2 is all the plexes, duplexes through sixplexes. R3, I'm looking for my sheet here. R3 is medium density multifamily, which are apartments and condo with a higher density. And then R4 is high density multifamily, which is, really condos and apartments again, but at a higher density. And then the final one is mobile homes and manufactured homes. Those are the 5 that the Planning Commission is currently considering, and we've gotten into a lot of discussion about the implications of this consolidation. And to illustrate, you may hear more about this later if we get to it. When we combine everything into the new R2 multiplex, we're basically saying that the owner of a property in the new combined multiplex can choose whatever kind of multiplex they want to build, provided it's congruent, consistent with the divisions. There's 26 divisions in the city of Ocean Shores that prescribe minimum unit size, setbacks, building height. So it has to comply with that. And then, as you said, it has to comply the construction footprint along with the prescribed parking. There's prescribed parking for every one of those multiplexes that that building and the prescribed parking has to conform to the 40% impermeable surface rule. So I'll recap by saying, point at any lot within the new R2 configuration. And we're acknowledging that if the lot is large enough, yeah, you can build a sixplex there, as long as the prescribed parking and the footprint of the sixplex are consistent with the division requirements and don't exceed the 40% rule.
Yeah, that's, yeah, those are completely legal and reasonable controls on development. So, lot size, impermeable surface, all that's creating a box, construction envelope for what's going in there. And then it's a function of how many units and what size units is left up to the builder that would be able to fit between 2 and 6 units on a lot. That's perfectly reasonable. I would say that I would put this forward as a benefit, because then as opposed to having 4 different separate districts, you're creating the opportunity for developers to come in and be able to look at that, okay, I can build this much on this property. If you have it under all these different fragmented ones, if you have a person who owns a parcel in R2 and it's a large lot and they can only build single family or duplexes on it, they're looking at something that they can't get a maximal economic return on. However, with the proposed R2, if it's large enough and they can put a sixplex on it, then they can get a better economic return on that parcel, because they're able to build it out to a certain, add to a higher number of units to be able to lease or sell them. So by that there's creating the opportunity for greater economic return. And there's the predictability within the district of, okay, there's a uniform building envelope. There's all, it's the transition between single family and higher density. You still have the impermeable surface. You still have the situation where where there's mandated off-street parking, X spots per unit, that you're not having the parking issue with everyone clogging the streets because the builder decided not to put in parking and the people owning or leasing the units have to park on the street because there is no mandated parking, constructed parking with the units. So it is, and you have a matrices. It's like, okay, if it's a lot between these sizes, it can have duplex or triplex on it, or be able to create a matrices based off of parcel size and setbacks and minimum sizes that you may set, that you'd be able to have that. And it would be it'd be clear, that, okay, over this large area we're encouraging development. So you would have builders being able to come in and build these units. And I suspect that there's the same situation in Ocean Shores over a number of available units and number of affordable units, that this is creates a potential to help alleviate that, because then you're creating a situation where builders can come in and create these units, and there's predictability, and there's a larger zone to create a larger variety of units.
Okay. You guys have any more questions about pyramid? I'm looking at the clock and I'm a little concerned because we've still got two other guests with us. Have you heard enough about pyramid zoning that we can move to the next subject?
What I just heard Matt define our proposed R2 fits in perfectly with my understanding and vision of proposed. I think we're golden.
Well, I certainly wrote down a number of things that Matt said that look to be positive, more positives than negatives. In fact, I didn't write down any negatives. And Marlene, I'm hoping that you're basically hearing what we're going to respond to your comment about as we've thought about how we could combine these zones and what the implications of them are. One of the things that I just heard Matt say that if we've condensed our multifamilies into a single zone, we're basically avoiding conflict. We're creating, as he said, predictable outcomes, but also the expectation about traffic, parking, and what have you is clear within that zone. So is everybody okay if we move to talking about the gateway and the south, what I call the South End Development Zone? Okay, this will be a transition where we'll talk with Nick here momentarily. So the next item in your package after pyramid zoning is a document labeled October 5th, 21. It went out with the agenda package. So I know you've all seen it. And this is basically my attempt. It isn't a planning commission document. It's my attempt to characterize what the comprehensive plan intent was for what we call the Gateway Corridor. We talked about that a lot. In the comp plan, it's really unfortunate that this is what it says about what I characterized as the South End Development Zone. There is no title for it. It starts out with, the opening paragraph is, the majority of commercial residential uses are found in the southern end of the city where it applies along Point Brown Boulevard from Tonkin to Marine Drive or to the marina. It doesn't say a whole lot more than that. It just defines the area, but it speaks to it in sort of glowing terms. And it ends by saying the commercial center in Oyhut Bay is an example of the neighborhood center concept that the Planning Commission envisioned for the South End. And so we can change my silly little name. South End Development Zone is not very attractive, but nevertheless, that's what this next document is about. So I described it as being an overlay on top of the existing zones. So even if we didn't change any of the zones underneath it, there needs, I think, to be some kind of ordinance that captures or codifies, is really the right word, the intent of the comp plan on top of those affected areas. So everybody okay with the concept?
I think the concept is really, really good, and I don't see anything wrong with the South End Development Zone. That kind of clear makes it clear. My question is, do the existing zoning ordinances as they kind of get tweaked, do we need to specify a South End Development Zone? And maybe that makes sense because we're specifying a gateway corridor. And this is just an extension of that. And so I guess I'm just trying to be able to label it in my mind. Or do we need to label, or does the commercial zone allow to progress without a label? I hope that makes sense.
Actually, 2 points. One, at least based on what I wrote down here, the South End Development Zone, let's put it this way, the south end of the peninsula is the cleanest slate we've got, relatively speaking, on Ocean Shores. It's the least built out, right? So we've got the least number of non-conforming issues, perhaps. So given that it's a clean slate, I think that's what we're gonna have to look at. We're gonna have to lay that layer, defined by those geographic street boundaries on top of the existing zones and look through it and say, okay, what, if anything, do we need to add to those existing zones? Or maybe worst case, do we want to change those zones? I'm not advocating that. I don't know that we have any reason to right now. I think we need to just look at it and see. But my second point is that maybe because the South End Development Zone is more of a clean slate, it gives us the opportunity to clone, for lack of a better word, the Oyakhut Bay or Seabrook picture, where you've got mixed use, you've got pedestrian friendly access. So it's a little different from the Gateway, and at least in my mind's eye, just because Oyakhut Bay doesn't look like a Gateway, and the Gateway is never going to look like Oyakhut Bay, right?
So I think that you have clarified, in my mind, you've clarified the picture. And I'm ready to hear what Nick has to say.
Okay, so that's the segue. Here's the other point I want to make. I've looked at a number of different cities' code. And there are other cities that have these special development divisions or districts. They use different words. We can't use division because it's already used by the code. We could use district, but I think that gets confusing too, given our existing code. But the point is that you find these other cities in Washington that have these districts that have sort of a special label like Gateway or South End Development Zone. And when you read their code, they start out with a paragraph that's called intent. I know, Richard, you've looked at it, I've looked at it, I don't know if the rest of you have, but right there in the very beginning of the code, in fact, it's true in our code right now, you'll see intent, I think, purpose. So I'm suggesting that perhaps we use some of this language or tweak it. I'm not married to it. This stuff is tweakable, changeable. But we use some opening paragraph that describes the intent, and then we get into the details of the ordinances. And again, this is where I asked Nick about helping us out, because it occurred to me in conversations with him that when we imagined in the Gateway Corridor that we were going to have, at least on Point Brown, some integrated, cohesive, multimodal transportation corridor with street lamps, and that was just friendly as can be, inviting, with as much parking as possible. That's kind of what our vision was, but it's not just Point Brown. It's that entire north end from Seagate all the way over to Ocean Shores Boulevard. And so I guess what I'm getting at is that I called Nick because I wanted to know why the Point Brown project failed. I wanted to know why the city was not able to capitalize on that intensive planning. And I wanted to do something in the planning commission that would help us be more successful the second time around. So I'm making a clear distinction here. He sends me all this stuff on the Point Brown project, and then he introduces me to the existing ordinances that's called Complete Streets. And if you read Complete Streets, it applies to the entire city. But what I have proposed is that we emphasize the implementation of complete investment build out of Complete Streets in the Gateway Corridor first, maybe. Second, the South End Development Zone, maybe. But those are details that we don't necessarily need to get into. So with that opening, Nick, tell us how you think Complete Streets is going to help us fulfill the vision of Gateway Corridor and the South End Development Zone.
How about that for an introduction? I appreciate that. So I think kind of rewinding it here just a little bit, Greg and I chatted, off and on about that framework that he just identified. And one of the important things that I thought was necessary to, spend a little bit of time on is the Complete Streets policy. The framework was adopted in December of 2012. And so I believe in the Planning Commission package, you have the language that is in the Ocean Shores Municipal Code. One of the things that's important, though, as you read through the municipal code, is each one of those is adopted via an ordinance. And so an ordinance, if you've ever read through those, they're not the most exciting read. You're looking for something to go to bed to, grab one of these, it'll help you out a little bit. But the ordinance, the initial part of that ordinance identifies, a bunch of different components that really are trying to capture the essence of, what we're doing and why we're trying to do this. And so a couple of different things that I wanted to read off for everybody, just so that you're aware of. Ordinance number 916, which is the Complete Streets Ordinance. The title of that, as you chew through the title, the last sentence in the title says, "This policy will be used when creating future transportation projects as an opportunity to improve public streets for pedestrians, bicyclists, and transit users, regardless of age or ability." And so when we think about, the Complete Streets process, as well as the Gateway Corridor, the basic component is it all really revolves around multimodal transportation, getting people from point A to point B, and creating an environment, inviting atmosphere for people to enjoy, all sorts of modes of transportation. So the ordinance then, continues on and says the term Complete Streets describes a comprehensive integrated transportation network with infrastructure and design that allows safe and convenient travel for all users, including pedestrians, bicyclists, motor vehicle drivers, transit users, emergency service providers, and freight, and all peoples of all ages, abilities, including children, youth, families, and other adults and individuals with disabilities. So the driving factor is that the intent is to cover absolutely anybody and everybody that's going to be using that transportation corridor. Tall order, I get it. So one of the other, I think, key components of the introductory segments of the Complete Streets Ordinance, you guys just hit the nail on the head, the intent, the purpose, and that language is, specifically identified, but I think there's something that actually does tie to the Gateway Corridor, and that's one of the whereases identifies the City of Ocean Shores wants to create a convenient, enjoyable connections from the beach to the hotel district to the business district to promote tourism and create economic development opportunities. This is something that was written, 10 years ago.
Can I interrupt just a
Sure.
second, Nick? This is part of the your agenda package. So the complete streets is in there, and what Nick just read to us is section 12.02.03. So you can kind of follow along with Nick's presentation. I'm sorry, I should have said that from the get-go. Go ahead.
Well, it's funny because what I'd actually highlighted that, and that's not exactly what I had intended to tie together, because that's actually written on page 1 of the ordinance. So it's ironic that the language then, marries up, perfectly. So I won't have to hit that item when we get there. The secondary component associated with this introduction is that, multimodal, opportunities or desires to incorporate multimodal elements into comprehensive planning. This isn't a new subject. I know you guys know you've spent a lot of time going through the 2007 comprehensive plan. That language was already identified in there as goal number T2. And again, that was predicated from the 1998 comprehensive plan. So this is something that, the city's been, focused on for the last, 20 plus years. But it really boils down to the desire is to have a transportation system that provides for alternate modes of transportation, such as pedestrian and bicycle travel. So the big piece is as you start to look at, the Ocean Shores Municipal Code. So let's dive into 12.2 or 12.02.030, which was included in the handout. The basic framework there is to create a comprehensive, integrated, connected transportation network for ocean shores that balances access, mobility, health and safety needs of pedestrians, bicyclists, transit users, motorists, emergency responders, freights, and users of all ages. One of the things that we haven't seen in here, and that section then goes on to identify a bunch of other key components that are generally associated with pedestrian mobility and safety. One thing that I didn't see in there was lighting, but I think that there is some other ancillary references that can kind of tie all of that together. One of the, I guess, kind of next components to dive into is 12.02.050. And so this is the best practice criteria, which basically says, hey, the mayor or designee, which I'm assuming will ultimately end up being me or is me, shall modify, develop, and adopt policies based on the American Association of State Highway Transportation Officials, the Institute of Transportation Engineers, and the National Association of City Transportation Officials. So those don't all necessarily jive together, but I think when we start talking about this concept of the Gateway Corridor, the basic premise, from my understanding, and that's one of the things that will be helpful for me to understand a little bit more, is that I'm assuming that the desire is really to focus on pedestrian mobility, from point A to point B, that is going to lead to, more customer to business interactions. So one of the things that jumped out at me while I was reading through this is that, I haven't developed those standards. And so that is something that is on the radar. We need to get that done. It's one box to check here in the near future. So those are the big components associated with, how the Complete Streets policy is framed out. Now, how does that tie to what the Planning Commission is intending to incorporate as far as this, South End Development Zone, as well as the Gateway Corridor? One of the biggest challenges that I've seen here in the last 7-8 years was that Point Brown project. That one of the biggest hurdles that we will face as we move forward is blending both public need with private need. And so the desire to have on-street parking versus off-street parking, and redevelop store frontages, that's going to be a very big challenge. I think the one blessing that we have, again, based on the understanding that I have of the Gateway Corridor, my understanding, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that the Gateway Corridor is not just Point Brown. It is, Seahorse, it's Menard, it's Ocean Shores Boulevard, it's the entire thoroughfare to get people from, the north end of the city all the way down to Chance. And so with that being said, there's some advantages that we, might be able to capitalize on, by, focusing development off of Point Brown and Ocean Shores Boulevard first, and looking at development and redevelopment of the Menard area, and I think it's Seahorse back there. So those two elements are definitely something to kind of keep in mind as we lay out this framework. From an implementation standpoint, that will be much easier for us to implement. But again, the biggest caution that I have is that interaction between individuals losing current on-street parking is going to be a big impact, and we're going to have to work through that on a case-by-case basis. I don't think that there's one standard cross-section that we can put out there that's going to say, hey, here's the silver bullet. So that's kind of the nuts and bolts associated with Complete Streets and how it integrates with the Gateway Corridor. Again, as Greg indicated, the South End Development Zone is kind of that blank slate. It's almost easier to start down on the south end because it is the blank slate. But I think the biggest benefit will be yielded up on the northern side of the city, when we start to dive into that. So that's kind of the nuts and bolts of that. What did I miss, Greg? Anything else that we want to dive into, or questions, thoughts, concerns, comments?
I think we'll just open it up to questions. Thank you, Nick.
I'd like to ask two questions, and I want to preface and say, I don't want to get down in the weeds, but there's engineering knowledge and experience to know if the ideas are even feasible. Again, I don't want to get into the weeds and discuss the ideas. Is it possible to clean up the Oyhut ditch behind the east side of all the Point Brown businesses, and then pave that over and create parking back there? Because parking is one of the key elements to this whole corridor development. And and the other side of that, is it possible to create a walking park down the median in Point Brown? And again, not a big discussion. Is that at all feasible, or is that just totally unrealistic?
The first item relating to the Oyhut ditch, it is feasible. Ironically, last week, maybe 2 weeks ago, I had a conversation with Fish and Wildlife about that, because I know there are a number of private owners throughout that corridor that do want to add culverts to that ditch. It's not something that Fish and Wildlife is excited about, and so I don't know what the solution is just yet. Individual culverts being put in, every other property, it's going to turn into a mess. And so holistically, that's something that we probably want to be thinking about. We do know that there's a lot of desire by property owners that own on the east side and west side to integrate both the east and west properties. And realistically, that may be one of those beneficial items that can help with the on-street parking on Point Brown. The secondary piece associated with a walking pathway down the median. This item was brought up during our Point Brown project. And so one of the things that we had discussed at that point in time, and again, without diving too deep into the nuts and bolts of it, when you walk down a median, you have hazards on both directions, or both sides of you. You're going to have cars coming behind you. You're going to have cars coming in front of you. So that's thing one. Thing two, when you park, you're going to have to walk to the area. So we would have to designate some walkway to get to a crosswalk, to get you over to the median, so that you can use the median, so that you could use a crosswalk to get to another store. So it's feasible. I just don't know how much it will realistically be used That space in the middle of the roadway, you know, more likely will be better served in some other fashion. And so when we talk about pedestrian mobility, one of the key pieces is, and we're talking about it right now as we talk about this pedestrian crossing, is that you want to get users from point A to point B as easy and convenient as possible. And so when they get out of their car, we want to be able to put them right on a facility where they can start walking, sidewalk, shared use path, whatever the case may be. We don't want them crossing traffic to get onto that walkway. Thing two is that if I'm going to park my car there, there's a good chance that I'm parking my car up there to go to one of those stores, which are located on the outside part of the right of way. And so the desire is, obviously, if we're going to provide an area for people to go to, we want to get them parking and walking in the direction to go to those facilities rather than playing in traffic. So a little long-winded, but hopefully that explains kind of the basic theory behind that.
You've answered my question beautifully, and what I heard is that although it's possible, it's potentially feasible, it's just not practical, and so it's not worth exploring anymore. I have one more real quick question. How far on the east side of Point Brown is the city's right of way? So using the go-kart track, for example, how much of the existing go-kart parking is currently in the city's right of way?
I think most of the vehicles that park there, I want to say it's about half and half. Somewhere in the range of 23 to 25 feet plus or minus from the edge of pavement is the city's right of way. So generally speaking, a car that is all the way parked up against one of the curb stops, a portion of that is going to be on private property and a portion of that's going to be on public property.
Richard, I've got a building over there and it's to the telephone poles. I'm gonna say about 15 feet off the pavement.
Okay. So you've answered my questions and probably took more time than I really needed. Thank you.
I have a question, if I may. As we're talking about the corridor, and we're talking about Menard, talking about Seahorse, I know that on Menard, that whole section of property on the west side of Menard is pretty highly classed wetland. So the feasibility of developing that from a practicality standpoint is going to be super expensive, even if you were to buy commercial wetland credits from the city wetland bank. It's super expensive. So as we think about this, I mean, do we have a practicality that if we say only these type of businesses can go here, but yet the cost to development is so prohibitive that it's never going to happen? Do we take that into consideration?
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely. And I'm glad you brought it up. We're jumping ahead a little bit, but in my discussions with Marshall, he brought that up, and I do actually have a copy of that wetland map that he provided. And again, we're getting down kind of into the real details that really fundamentally might become a job for Public Works to take on. And it's certainly one of those things that are going to be challenging. So I'm gonna, does anybody have anything else?
I have a question. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I got one more thing. You call it the South End Development Zone. Okay, so as it sits today, you look at Point Brown, and from Tonquin east, it's zoned B1. And then as you go inland a little bit to Seahorse, there's some B2. When you guys use Oyhead as kind of the example of what you'd like to see as the South End Development Zone, I'm not exactly sure how that would work. There's the Oyhead piece of property, the Quinaults own a piece of property that could be made potentially into what Oyhead is. And other than that, I don't know how you would do the rest of it.
That's good. I mean, you're still
I
edging
know.
us forward.
I know.
So I'm gonna leap there unless, let me finish where we're at and jump ahead a little bit because I'm worried about the time and I want to take advantage of Nick and Marshall. So, let's wrap this up.
I have one question for Nick and or Marshall, and that's just a technical question. Is it possible for the planning department to get the acetate that we could actually print the overlays that fit these maps? Is that your
Marshall and
choice?
I talked about it, and we'll have to buy the acetate and possibly some new ink, but the plotter technically could handle the job if the city doesn't actually have the Mylar or acetate for us and the ink to do it yet. So
But it's just a purchase order.
it's pretty much that, but I think there's other ways for us to do it. I mean, we're only talking about 2 areas.
Right.
And it gets right back to what Pat just asked, you know, what's underneath this?
Right.
And we're gonna have to pick up the rug, so to speak, and look and see what's under it, and that's why we've got to get into the weeds.
Yep.
And the weeds are, this is how I'm gonna end this particular point. In our agenda today, Nick just took us through complete streets. This is our existing code for complete streets. We also have chapter 17.42, which is called plan development. And that's essentially the code that permitted the development of Coyhoe Bay. We also have, what's the other code we've got in here is P3 resort tourism. And the reason these are all here is because that fundamentally is what's underneath the South Zone development area, with the exception of complete streets applying everywhere. So in the South End Development Zone, we're talking about the possibility of expanding the application of planned development to, we've got to look at it, but we're talking about expanding the application of that existing ordinance to the whole South End. We're also talking, with the exception of B3 would apply to basically what's the Quinault Nation lands, the marina. And then the complete streets would apply everywhere, down here and up there. So I just want to make you aware of that this is in the package, because it's going to be our homework between now and the next meeting. We each are going to go through this, given the concepts that we talked about for those 2 areas, and some other things that we're going to learn here, and actually start modifying the code. Look under the rug, see what the existing zones are, especially on the South End. I don't know. I mean, I look at the map and I can tell there's residential and there's commercial, and we need to ask ourselves, okay, so what's the implication of the South Zone development zone concept if we lay that on top of there? Is it gonna work? I don't know yet. I just haven't done that much research. So I'm gonna change our schedule a little bit to kind of prompt us for the discussion that's going to come up, and to segue better into what we just talked about that Nick just shared with us. So I'm going to ask you to go to the last page of your handout. Lose mine. Well, I had it out here. I got so many papers out here now, I've lost it. What's the last page of your handout say?
Draft examples of gateway corridor ordinances for PC consideration.
Right.
Selected reader.
Okay. Here it is. Okay, this is, Nick talked about, translating this all into code, meaning ordinances. And ultimately, that's what we've got to do. So I know that we wrestled with this at the end of last meeting. We thought maybe we need a consultant to come in here and help us do this. But I had the discussion with members, Nick and Marshall and some of you guys, and women, so I just crafted some to kind of get us going, and they're not, these are just completely my thoughts. But this is a way of implementing complete, it starts out, well, it focuses a lot on complete streets. So the first idea was to define the scope of the, let me drop back a little bit. When Nick and I talked about implementing complete streets or emphasizing its implementation in the North Zone, or the Gateway, we talked in terms of design and construction contracts. And Nick pointed out that, well, it may be too early for us to go hire some firm to do a design and construction contract, or for the public works to put that together. He recommended that maybe we just need to spend some money to do, Nick, I think you called it a scoping, some kind of a scoping study, that it's just an initial look at what we're talking about doing there and what would it mean in terms of subsequent design and construction contract. So I said that I don't think that the PC is going to do that work. I think it's going to be Public Works. It goes on to say that we can, though, develop ordinances. So have you all had a chance to scan these 8 ordinances? Or you want me to just read them to you? Number 1, the scope of the contract, meaning that design contract, includes all the streets and infrastructure within the Gateway Corridor, not just the Point Brown Boulevard. So I think we all understand, we're talking about all those streets from Oyhut Ditch all the way over to Ocean Shores Boulevard down to Chance. Number 2, the principles expressed in the existing complete streets ordinance will be applied to all affected roadways within the Gateway Corridor. Number 3, the design contract will specify the complete redevelopment of Point Brown, emphasizing integrated multimodal pathways with street lamps and as much parking as possible. Number 4, street lamps will complement existing lighting at Chancellor Mere at the Convention Center. Number 5, adjacent street and vacant land will be redeveloped to maximize parking while facilitating multimodal conveyance. Number 6, prescribed parking requirements by business must be addressed. Number 7, stage construction to minimize disruptions to seasonal tourist activity. Number 8, suspend development permits until we get the design construction contract out, so that we know what we want in the future. Number 8, I intentionally put in there to jerk everybody's chain and otherwise illustrate that yes, we can put teeth that hard into the ordinance. The city council just has to decide whether or not they want to adopt it. So I wanted to go through this, given that we just talked about ways of emphasizing the application of complete streets to what our job is. So I don't know that I want to spend a whole lot of time talking about this right now, but I don't want to get out of this meeting without giving you how this stuff ties together. What we're trying to do by the end of the year is actually come up with statements just like this that would take the form of ordinance. Okay?
So my question, Greg, is what's wrong with using these statements as the ordinance? As I read these and have contemplated them over the last few days, they look like they have captured the essence of what your and the PC's objective is. And I don't know that off the top of my head, after considering it for 3 or 4 days, that I can add significantly to what you've already put down here. What's wrong with these?
Well, that's fine, but Pat just brought up one and I wrote it down. We need to mitigate or figure out how do we deal with these wetland issues, because they're not insignificant. You know, they're gonna limit the community's ability to completely capture the essence of the Gateway Corridor in particular. So I already added another one, and I'm glad you asked the question, Richard, because I'm gonna continue to use this metaphor about looking under the rug. The rug is the Gateway Corridor and the South End Development Zone. It's a rug, if you will, but it's transparent, and we gotta look through it and look at the underlying code, the underlying zoning and code that goes along with it. And as we read it, again, we've got some of the code here, as we read it, ask ourselves, does it fit the filter? Does it fit with that rug on top of it? Some of it will, some of it won't. We're gonna have to deliberate that.
That's why I asked the question, is it feasible for Marshall to provide us with that transparent rug that we can put over the top of those overlays? And if so, how soon can we get that?
I think we could do it if we had two. We don't have to necessarily have an overlay. We could just put them side by side and just figure it out.
I think so
That's
too.
not-
I don't think it's that large of an area. I mean, we know the gateway is pretty simple.
So in any project that I've ever done, I've always had a concept in mind. So this downtown corridor, I don't believe that we have what our concept is. I don't believe that we all agree or know what we want Ocean Shores to look like. So how do we write ordinances when we don't even know what we're writing ordinances for? So if we're going to say, okay, Mr. Joe Hot Dog Stand, he comes to the city and says, I want to build this building and sell hot dogs, okay? We're going, well, you got to build streets, you got to put these streetlights in. Well, what do they look like? Well, we don't know. Where do they go? We don't know. That's what I'm just saying. I keep coming back to, you gotta have a concept.
Okay, well, that's what the October 5th thing was about. So if that's not sufficient, we need to modify it.
It isn't sufficient for me, but
Okay.
it's
Then we
sufficient for
need to
you
work,
guys.
then we need to work on
Okay.
it.
Pat, you have verbalized, I have struggled with that for 3 or 4 days now. What is the underlying vision? What's the underlying concept? And I can't quite picture it, and that's why I struggle with some of the weeds, because I can't picture the big picture. I can't visualize it.
You all have just defined your homework for the next meeting. I want you to take this concept paper and rewrite it. I don't care what you do, but each of us has a responsibility to weigh in on doing exactly what Pat just said. And then we also have a responsibility to follow through and write what this last item is, write the code that goes along with it. It's not that big a job. We just gotta roll up our sleeves and do it. So that's a preview of our homework for the next meeting. I do want to get to the stuff that Marshall and I have worked on, so can I crash on?
Go for it.
I've already took care of the last agenda.
Hey, Greg, can I jump in for just 2 seconds on that homework item? One thing that would be really helpful is pictures. I know we talk about describing it verbally, but pictures are really helpful. They describe 1,000 words, right? So if you know, coinciding with what Pat was talking about, I mean, if there's a desired vision, desired outcome, whatever the case may be, and there's some place that you can picture, or you've seen it in Google Maps or whatever the case may be, that's one thing that ultimately, when it comes to down the road, when we start going down the execution road, that's one thing that will be really helpful is to address that vision or that desired outcome.
That's a really good point, Nick.
Where's all the paperwork on the $20 million project?
Well, that's just exactly where I was gonna go. Nick sent it to me, okay? And he sent me the entire Point Brown project, and it's got lots of pictures. And it's got a schematic that Nick, all engineers relate to. It's called a cross-section, and it shows, what the typical street looks like. But there's also diagrams. So Nick, is it okay if we share that with the whole planning commission?
Oh, of course, it's on the website.
Yeah, okay, well, we'll get that out.
But remind us, so they had several options.
They had four.
And they proposed to the public to vote on these 4 options.
Yeah, now, I'm glad you brought that up, Tony, because you're going somewhere where I don't think I want to go. And I don't think, I shouldn't say where I don't want to go, where I don't think the PC wants to go. There's a line between what the PC does and what Public Works does. And I don't see the PC getting into the details of what the downtown configuration would be. Now, if you all think we should, well, I guess we can try our hand at it, and this.
Explain to me the difference between what you just said and what the homework assignment was, because the homework assignment to me sounded like I need to come up with my individual plan for what the downtown looks like.
Well, I don't want you to come up with your individual, I want you to read the comp plan and offer your translation, if you will, of the comp plan in your own words about what does that mean and how do we write code for it. But I guess maybe I cut you off, Tanya, too quickly, but I want to caution us about getting into trying to figure out what the answer is, because that's another process. That's a whole nother process that I'm not even sure the planning commission will conduct. Somebody would have to tell us to start off a planning project that's as extensive and detailed as the Point Brown project. So I'm more than willing to share it with everybody, as long as they keep in mind that the purpose for sharing it is just to emphasize Nick's point about how those pictures can help us in our effort to characterize the Gateway Corridor and the South End development. So I apologize for cutting you off.
No, that's fine. I just wanted to make sure we all have the context of what we'd be looking at for looking at those things, and also why it didn't move forward.
Well, Nick went through, he started by, when he went to Point Brown, I was writing it down. He gave us the warnings, and there's a table 8 in the package. When you look at this package, it's extensive. I mean, there's multiple parts to it. It's another code in and of itself. It's a planning project. I mean, it's like an environmental impact statement. So this table 8 shows, it's a list of all the things that came up that really, correct me if I'm wrong, Nick, but those were the stumbling blocks that the city could not overcome when it came to selecting any one of the alternatives. And consequently, we lost our chance at $14 million. And it's just a crying shame. So we're sort of trying to resurrect this, but at a bigger scale. It's not just Point Brown. It's Point Brown and all the territory from Coyhoe Ditch to Ocean Shores Boulevard.
So I have to say that I thought that I understood the homework, and then what you just said has me confused again. I go back to what Pat said earlier, that I need to visualize what we want Point Brown to look like without that visual photograph, without that image in my head. Then sidewalks, what sidewalks look like.
Okay, I'm really concerned about the time, so I'm gonna,
let's table this and move. towards
Yeah,
what you want to do.
I'll send all this stuff out to you. And, you know, we'll see how it helps. But I'm not gonna encourage you to get into coming up with the perfect design. That's not our job. So I want to go to Title 17 recommendations. This has to do with trying to figure out if we could build a matrix or a table to support our combinations, consolidations of residential zones. So basically, I've already pretty much explained it when we were talking with Matt. But as Marshall and I mean, we spent 3 hours together working through this, trying to figure out how to do this. And there were a number of tables that you had to access to figure out from a developer standpoint, what could you do? And it turned out that it really wasn't all that difficult. It's more of what I've termed to be a calculation process. And don't let the spreadsheet scare you. The only reason the spreadsheet's any longer than 4 lines is because I evaluated multiple options.
I want to interrupt for just a second. I'd like to make a motion that we extend this planning meeting for 10 or 15 minutes if necessary to complete the business on the table and then wrap up the things that we need to do. So I make the motion that if we need to, we extend the meeting for another 10 or 15 minutes to accommodate completing this mission
We
today.
only have the 4:15.
I don't know if Marshall has that.
Yeah, Rich has to.
Yeah, it's a busy day for some people. Real busy day, and Marshall's technically off.
It's just,
So,
Sounds like it failed to have a second.
okay,
yeah, we
okay, do we
Sorry.
spend enough time on it?
may not be able to. And you guys haven't had a chance to read it, right? I don't know.
Yes.
You have not been able to read this particular paper because I just gave it to you this morning. Let me summarize. I gotta get my head around it. I'm going to, right. Okay, let's start with that. Thank you.
The original.
Right. Okay, so let's start with, this is in your package. Don't go to the October 10th, go to the Title 17 recommendations. This is where we got at the last meeting in terms of our basis for consolidating 11 zones down to 5. And then we had this table down at the bottom that was an attempt to provide enough instruction for a developer or a prospective property purchaser to have some idea about what they could build. And we got tangled up in that. And Pat and me and Marshall were supposed to get together and figure out how to do this. And so we did some of that and discovered that what it ultimately comes down to is that you can point at any residential lot in Ocean Shores and you immediately know what division it is. If you know what division it is, the division tells you what the minimum size of the unit is. The division tells you what the setbacks are, and the division tells you what the building height limitations are. What?
No, that's not the way it works. Because you can go to Division 21 and their interior lots are 650 square feet or 800 square feet. The waterfront lots are 1,000 square feet.
Okay.
Which is, that's,
Well, isn't that by division?
yeah, but you said you can go to any division and it'll tell you exactly what the lot square footages are. It's just not one lot size in one division.
Right, in Division 10, for example, it's 800 square feet if you're not on the water, it's 1,000 square feet if you're on the water. But the point is that's where all the information is. You go to the division and it tells you these parameters, these criteria for construction. So we're still on, right?
For single family, correct,
Yeah, well, that's all we're talking about multifamily too.
correct.
Okay, so we're talking about residential.
So would you would have the same dwelling size limitation in a multifamily and a single family?
No. That's not, look,
Okay.
the division number only specifies what the minimum dwelling size is. That's all. No, it's not all. That's one of the things that it specifies. There's 26 divisions in Ocean Shores. The divisions as I presented at the last meeting represent the chronological platting and surveying of Ocean Shores over time. Unfortunately, as Ocean Shores did that, they changed the code for all practical purposes as they did that. So it's no wonder we have a very complicated code. So it's not a secret, it's easy, it's a lookup table to go to the division and know these parameters. Given those parameters and the parking, the prescribed parking, Marshall, where is the prescribed parking? That's in the code, right? Are you there, Marshall?
Marshall, you're muted, bud.
Buddy, can't hear you.
It is in the code, and I forgot the code number, but it basically boils down, I think you mentioned it in your someplace, boils down to 1.5 parking spaces per dwelling unit.
Right, and
it is in the code.
right, and because you can't have 1.5, then Marshall gave me the breakdown for a duplex. I think it's 3 spaces, blah, blah, blah. It's specified, that's the point. So there's no mystery about it. And then all you do is say, okay, you apply the 40% rule to the size of the lot. And that gives you your maximum impact, construction impact. And given those 3 parameters, minimum dwelling size, maximum height, and prescribed parking, it's basically 200 square feet, 200 square feet per space. That's what that means. It's 200 square feet per parking spot. You got your answer about what you can build there. I mean, it's that simple.
So we
This
don't,
is not rocket science.
we don't need a matrix
No.
for Billy. All we need to do is say we're in section 18 and section 18 parameters are this, and I bought three contiguous lots, and so I can build this big of a house.
Well, that came up. Marshall and I talked about that. Is that what do you do if somebody chooses to eliminate lot lines? And if, I guess after he and I talked about it, and I gave him a curt answer that you're not gonna be able to do that. And then after I thought about it, I thought, well, why not? As long as you don't exceed the density of the zone,
Exactly.
you can do whatever you want.
Yep.
And that gets back to, I think, the question that Marlene asked earlier. As long as you don't violate the density of the zone, where does the density come from? It comes from our comprehensive plan map that shows what the density is, right? On your heads, because there's only 3 of them, low, medium, and high. And we know where they're all at. So if you know what the density is, then no, you can't put a condo / apartment on a medium density property. I don't care how many you own in a row, right? Okay, so we're running out of time. The last thing I want you all to know about and read about, so we can talk about it at the next meeting, because I don't think we're not gonna get through it all right now, is going from multiplex to single. And we asked Matt about, do we have the authority to do that? Yes, we do have the authority to do that. You ask us to come up with the consequences or the impacts of doing that. And the paper that you have in there lists 4 different areas in Ocean Shores where we, back in 2018, recommended moving from multifamily to single family. I think the total is what, almost 200 lots.
About 289.
289, is that the total?
I didn't.
Okay.
In my head, so-
It's actually quite a few.
Yeah.
And we're aware that there's a discussion about how does this relate to affordable housing. So I also put in your package communication that Tanya and I had over this, and she wrote some good questions. But Marshall and I are gonna have to get back together to come up with the answers to those 3 questions. So because of the time, I'm gonna recommend that we table this till next meeting. I'm gonna catch up with the notes. I was taking a lot of notes on my notebook here, and I'll have to get them recorded for everybody to see. They will be on flip chart notes. So I'm sorry, Marshall.
No, that's okay.
Yeah, anything to add?
I don't. We moved really quick through a lot of information today, so there's a lot to think about.
Yep. One other question, we answered the question, how many lots we would change, but how many lots are left that are still buildable?
Right,
Tanya asked that question.
and
Okay.
if you're digging into it, it'd be nice to know how many units we're talking about.
Yeah.
Not just, is it undeveloped, or is it a triplex or a duplex or fourplex?
Yeah, we're ready. Yeah, with today's zoning, we can figure that out. I'll tell you what, one of the things is that Marshall and I figured out, or at least I did. When you look at one of our zoning maps, because we have so many zones, 14, it's really hard to differentiate some of the colors. And for the life of me, I couldn't discern the difference between single family and triplex, or not triplex, single family and duplex. It's just marginally different in color. So.
Perfectly clear.
Yeah, perfectly clear. So anyway, we're gonna have to go back and do some homework on this, okay? So, it's yours. I'm done.
Okay. On the, we'll take up for the next time, retirement.
Not feeling well.
Feeling better in a couple weeks. And,
I'm not sure.
Our next meeting is October 26th, 2021. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Second.